Hello everybody, my name is Luke and welcome to today's podcast of Bla Mistħija, loosely translated to no shame, I would guess. In this podcast, we are going to be discussing intimacy and sexuality with no reservations, with no holding back, curiosities and questions that we've all been meaning to ask. This is the space we're going to be talking about it with some of our brilliant guests that we have with us. And today's guest that we've got Kat and Jackie. Thank you so much for being part of this podcast with us here today. You've travelled from quite far to be here, but even today, literally you travelled far because you came from Gozo and we are in that Awsalla over here in Malta. How was the trip to join us today?
As usual, when we get together, we just talked the whole way over. It was good. Yeah, sunny day.
Thank you so much for travelling to be here with us. But also, we are talking in English because you are not Maltese as far as not born here. Where are you from, Kat?
I'm originally from New York, but my family is Gozo. So I grew up coming here as a kid, and I moved here almost 6 years ago.
6 years ago, you've been here, and you live in Gozo. Amazing. What about you, Jackie? What brings you to Malta?
Well, I moved to Gozo about 25 years ago, and I was born in the UK, in Yorkshire, North Yorkshire, and I feel now Gozo is very much my home.
Fantastic. Well, welcome. I should have said that many years ago, but welcome to our lovely islands. But more importantly than that is that you're not just here with all of us. You do some incredible work with the LGBT community as two queer women, two strong queer women yourselves. Kat, you work, of course, for LGBTI+. Gozo and Jackie, you work for Checkpoint Malta, two incredible organisations who work relentlessly on supporting our community, having the conversations that nobody's having, and being the activists for all of us for a better tomorrow. However, I would love to hear your experiences in both of you not being born here, but you have found a home, a purpose, a reason, a place where you can create, a place where you can change people and change policies and move on to the next, more brighter chapter of our queer community. I would love to know, before we even get into the nitty-gritty of what we're going to be discussing today, I would really love to know what your experience living here has been like, and what I think has inspired you to both be in your respective big organisations. It would be really lovely to hear what your journey has been like in being here.
For me, when I moved to Gozo, it was right before the pandemic. And over time, I really wanted to meet community, make friends, and really integrate. Because I wanted Gozo to be my home. So I think I really looked up LGBT organization Gozo, and I found LGBTI+ Gozo, and it instantly became my home. You know, the conversations we were able to have together, it was family, and for queer folk, that's so important, our queer family. And then over time, just becoming more involved in it as a volunteer, as an executive member, now as community officer. And it's thrilling to see the growth, that this organization has done and the good work that we're doing. Because especially in Gozo, it's very small. Everyone knows each other. There's what I call double insularity. So you're a queer person on an even smaller island. And for me, I came out in New York, where there's a lot of anonymity. You could walk down the street and be who you are. So I really thought when I came here that I wouldn't be able to express really who I am as a queer person. But I was really pleased to find LGBT Gozo. And I was like, wow, I can be myself here. So it's been, I think I've become more of an activist than when I was in New York here in Gozo.
That is so fascinating. I myself, as we've spoken before, we are friends before this podcast as well. I myself live in the UK currently as well. And that cross-section of experiences, what we take from one community to another community, I think it's one of the richest, I'm going to call it transactions, maybe not necessarily a transaction, but one of the richest sharing of experience that we could have. What about you, Jackie?
Very different story, really. So when I first came to Gozo in 2001, I guess, to live, I came from Edinburgh. I'd been living in Edinburgh for 20 years. And I came because of a relationship. I came to an old farmhouse that was needing a lot of work, a lot of TLC, and I came to be an artist, basically. I had started doing a welding course and learned artistic metalwork back in Edinburgh, and I found Gozo offered me a space where I could practice that. But more importantly, really, than that, I came to Gozo. Can I say this in a way? Yes. I came to Gozo because I thought I came to Gozo to die.
Okay.
Because I had been diagnosed in the previous couple of years as HIV positive, and I was very, very sick. So at the same time as I was transforming my life, I was also looking at possibilities of death and thinking, I'm going to give this a go because it's a good chance for me to do something that I really want to do and to change my life completely. But I didn't know what the possibilities were going to be in terms of my health. So Gozo, actually, now I'm still sitting here all these years later, has saved me in lots of ways. So I owe Gozo a tremendous debt. But so I didn't come as an activist or, anything like that. In fact, I actively wanted to be seen as an artist. I hid my status to most people. I certainly didn't want to be seen as I hated the idea of being seen as the artist with AIDS, put it that way.
Yes.
And so that was not something that I was upfront about. And similarly, wasn't upfront about my queerness either, even though, I was having relationships with women and, so it's taken me a long journey to kind of come back to myself in some ways in terms of my sexuality, sexual identity. And LGBTI Gozo has also really played a big part in that. And, the work that they do is tremendous. And that's been in the last few years. But as an activist through Checkpoint Malta, which came through my status living with HIV, that I got in touch with them in a time of crisis, when I really didn't know how I was going to be able to get my meds and get my treatment because there was a shortage. And I reached out and got help through those channels, through HIV Malta and through Checkpoint Malta. And that was the start of the journey that I've been on since about 2020.
And how much you've given back to that community through your work with Checkpoint Malta.
Yeah, they, had tremendous help and support, and now, part of the family. And also, Checkpoint, though, it's not exclusively LGBTI plus people living with HIV that we concentrate. It's everybody, because everybody needs to get tested. It's an issue that affects everybody. So, there is a difference there, but our worlds intersect so much. Exactly. And I've definitely found my family and a tribe through the queer community, through that activism work with Checkpoint.
You have no idea the joy I get in here. Also hearing those true stories, that if I had to join in on that, I left Malta and went to the UK in search for a community because I just couldn't find where my legs could stand here with my own. And the more I'm talking in podcasts such as these, the more I realize that these communities have been around for lots and lots and lots of time. But if there had to be one aim of a podcast such as this and the people who are listening to us, it is to really get to discover the amount of people who are out there like us. We've discovered in our little conversation that all three of us express ourselves in art in some way or another in very, very different ways. But the things that connect us, and I think the tribes that we form, are so fantastic. So it gives me endless pleasure to know that Gozo has given so much back to you, as much as I know that you've given back to that community and to the Maltese and Gozan community in general. And thank you so much for sharing that with us, Jackie, as well. But if we had to focus on that and how the art that might have played as well a big role in you being in Gozo as well. We are three queer people, but you are two queer women. There is an identity and expression that we so intend to celebrate in a platform such as this. But before we even go into that queer identity, you are both artists. Kat, you are a writer.
I am a writer as well.
Even handling LGBTI Gozo as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and even maybe what works we have to look forward to, and how that process even informs, just loading with questions, how it even informs your own expression?
writing has been a deep part of who I am for a very long time. Um, I started writing very steadily, very strongly when I was about 13, 14. And it was a real medium to get out and express what I was not able to express in the outside world. I mean, I always felt different from the people around me. Through writing, I was really able to find my own voice and really celebrate who I was in that way. So writing has always been something so special to me, and expressing my sexuality through that, expressing my gender identity through that. But something I'm really proud of is the anthology Gozo Voices, which we published a few years ago, which was my little baby. It started from these creativity club initiatives that we would put on, where we would use writing as this medium to express ourselves and particularly express the struggles that we as queer people face. So we had all of this beautiful writing, and I was like, I can't just do nothing with it, you know? And so we put together this story, this collection of writing. And I remember I wrote a story about being misgendered at the airport here in Malta. And that was a fun experience, you know.
And other people joined in on this project?
Yes, yes, yes.
Earlier you mentioned how Gozo might have been the Gozo relationship with anybody's queer identity, not necessarily yours, is something really worth exploring. Did something come out of this anthology or this process that somebody listening to us might also go, yes, I relate to that, or no, that is actually really interesting on how those two experiences might inform / make this experience quite unique? Was there anything that came out? I'm curious, that's why I asked.
What I was really struck by was the passion, the vulnerability, the humanness that emerged through all of these stories. And also the process, it's such a self-reflective process. Just writing and sitting with yourself and allowing yourself to go to that place where you stay with that feeling. So I was really struck by that and what it emerged within myself. A lot of questions about my own gender identity, you know, and it was a very full circle moment for me of recalling how as a young child I was always a tomboy and always, you know, embraced the more masculine side of myself. And then over time, we were talking about this on the ferry, the messages you receive from the world around you of what you should look like, who you should be, who you should love, you know. So it was in writing that story, it was a process of going back to that time and really sort of forgiving myself for putting myself in certain boxes, because I had to for survival at that point, you know? So it was an act of like kind of redemption for myself, you know, that I can be here now 20 years after I came out for the first time and really have an empowerment in my identity, and really not caring what other people think, you know, and just being able to live authentically myself to please myself.
What a fascinating full circle on how, but also the art stream is such a useful tool for rediscovery and rediscovering something from your own self, which I think I experienced in my own work as well. But there's also something I think so admirable, and I'm sure people will follow LGBTI Gozo, that if projects like these do come back or they are ongoing, it's such an incredible opportunity of self-analysis and question on what one is doing. Writing is your legacy. Jackie, artistic metalwork. And you just sprung this on me today, even though I know that you're an artist.
Okay.
Artistic metalwork.
Yeah.
There is a beautiful journey that Kat's explained there for us. What has your process been, and has anything through this medium or the process of training in this medium informed your identity in any way?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I'd worked in all kinds of different jobs, but I'd always used photography, say videography, things like that as part of my work and communicating. So a lot of the time I was documenting or promoting, recording work that was being done for the organizations that I worked for. So there's always an artistic element there. and writing as well, especially poetry. My poetry is shit. But it was always, and still is actually, something that I go back to. Often in times of sadness or confusion or crisis. Yes. And something that I don't know, it's just, rather than writing essays or whatever, poetry I've always liked as a medium. But then I spent some time in South Africa through a job that I was doing in the late 90s. And I saw people working with very little in townships. And a lot of the stuff they were doing was bashing metal, making stuff out of metal. To express their artistic side, because they were using junk, they were using scrap, whatever came to hand. And I thought, I really want to learn how to do that. And I'd always spent time, like when I was a kid, with my dad, going into workshops and, you know, enjoyed getting dirty and a bit of that kind of tomboy thing, you know. I mean, I had this dilemma. I was like the tomboy thing, I was a pony girl, you know, and the whole thing about, don't get me started, the whole thing about girls and ponies and that whole world, very interesting subject of another podcast probably. But this whole thing, I was drawn to metal. And, you know, I found a course that I could do that suited me. So I was in my late 30s, really wanted to change direction. I hated going into an office type situation, even though I had really interesting jobs and traveled and things like that. But I thought, there has to be more, you know, there has to be more to, you know, that authentic self thing. I knew I wasn't happy in that path and I had to. So I was just drawn, and I found there was this course in Edinburgh, New Opportunities for Women to Learn Artistic Metalwork. It's a course just for women. But it was learning how to weld. It wasn't just messing around, you know, dabbling. It was, we had to do test pieces, we had to do welds, brazing, you know, the whole MIG, TIG, oxyacetylene welding thing, using power tools. And I got into this situation, got the overalls on with all these other women, incredible group of women from different walks of life. And I just felt, probably for the first time in my life, I was home.
How beautiful.
You know, I did that, the very first weld I did. It was like a transformative moment. It was like poetry in itself, you know, just being at one with that flame and the metal. And, you know, so I just found a lot of myself through that, through learning that process and learning how to be strong, learning it was okay to get dirty. It was fine to not have good nails and you know, and not having to put a suit on to, you know, in the morning kind of thing.
So it must be liberating that
Very.
But also I think you're so fantastic in the verbal choice there that I felt like home. And I think so many people, even in our queer journey, to bring it back to why we're all, what brings us together here today, what wealth there is at that. And right now, I felt home. I'm pretty sure that in a craft such as that, stereotypes would have played quite a lot as far as, and I'll preface that by saying I've got two incredible, strong queer women in front of me, and I never want, as a gay man over here, I will never want to assume or move or try to steer the direction away. I am somebody who has a huge thirst for knowledge and realize my limitation and the awareness of the queer female experience. So I hope that in all of our conversation, there'll never be a point where we go, let me tell you what you should say. Because I have no idea how I'm the opposite I want to be in a conversation. But I do understand the limitations that I'll have and understanding a world that might necessarily be mine. But am I right in saying that there would have been a huge stereotype that you are absolutely bashing onto his head and going like, no, I am going to use that power tool, and no, I don't. Was it still considered to be a male-dominant world?
Very much so. Although actually in the UK, there was a whole kind of movement at that time of women blacksmithing and, you know, a lot of women doing sculptural metalwork and casting and things like that. So far more than here. there was definitely, you know, an element of that. The very fact they did that kind of course and knew they were going to get people who would, it was oversubscribed, you know, we had to kind of apply to do it. But it was actually the bunch of women were so interesting. And so that blew stereotypes out of the water straight away. You would not have, you know, if you'd put us all in a room, you would not, nobody would have said, oh, they're all welders, you know, because there was a nursery nurse, there was a florist, there was a woman who was doing, was already an artist, a textile designer. There was me who'd worked in PR and communications and marketing and environmental education for years. There were a hairdresser, you know, all these different, a chef, you know, all these different women. And when we did our first exhibition after our first year, we called it the Brazen Hussies, because brazen is a part of the welding process. And yeah, we were all hussies, basically. And we were all, you know, real kind of quite out there women, and became more so in the course of the thing. But we were in a college with very traditional male tutors, you know, guys, mostly, and it was guys. There were no women on the other courses learning how to be plumbers or electricians or what have you. So, you know, we broke the mold and we got a lot of looks and I wouldn't say hostility, because we actually proved that we could do it. You know, so the stereotypes were really blown out of the water.
There's something about, and even going back to you saying I found home at that point, that should that stereotype have been so strong, that moment would have never arrived. And I think I'm going to take that as our pivot into you as queer women in this country, not just queer women, you're queer activists and in incredibly important organisations who we as a community would rely on so much. I'd really love to use your experience, your artistic experience, almost as a parallelism, not necessarily directly informing, but your queer identity as queer women, I'm sure would have met, okay, maybe let me not say that so that I don't project, but I would assume would have met stereotypes and stereotyped ways of behavior, stereotyped ways of speaking, stereotyped ways that you in your own identity, before I even brand you as the activist, would have had to surely combat, experience, understand, and possibly through your art as well, get to interrogate. And that's really what I'd love for us to open up and discuss about, whether it is on what got you sitting into these seats right now today, but also your own experience for other people who might have not discovered a tribe like that yet, or discovered a way on which this is how I can interpret my queerness, or any other facet of somebody's life that they are going through right now. I'd love to hear the story of you as queer women and the strength that you have today, that you're also through that strength sharing through other people. What has it faced and how did it become what it is today? I know, very easy questions. It's a very easy question.
Especially when you're, you know, in your 60s like me and you've got a long way back to go. You know, it's not like it was 10 years ago.
We can edit and it'll be fine. I can feel no pressure. But it fascinates because I see so much strength, even in the way that you talk about what you are passionate about and finding home and finding safety. I constantly think that there was a period of my life where that strength was not something automatic. And I know for sure that there might be people listening out there who will ask, it's very easy to go and walk into that group or lead a whole anthology of people's experience, but I can never dream of beginning to have that first step. So rather than asking you how does somebody do that first step, I'd really love to know your own experience in finding that strength as queer women.
I always knew that I was different. I knew I was not straight probably by the time I was 8 years old, you know, and even at that time, I was very much embracing a very fluid gender identity as a young person. You know, I remember thinking to myself, I'm not a boy, I'm not a girl, I'm just me, you know? So I always felt that presence and the separation from the people around me. so there was always that I was holding on to. And then when I was in high school, I felt okay. I know that I'm not straight. I feel that I'm bisexual. So I'm gonna share this newfound understanding of myself to the people around me. And it was not accepted. It was not treated
This is back
positively.
in New York.
This is back in New York
Okay.
at a very liberal performing arts high school.
Wow.
So I, of course, went into it thinking, wow, people are, yeah, it's going to be great. And it just was not great.
Wow.
There was so much fear from them and curiosity, but uncertainty and just no, you know.
I have definitely been in a situation where that was said, oh, because you're in Malta. Because you're in Gozo. Of course, people are going to react like that because you're in Gozo. But you're telling us that this was also in a performing arts environment where you'd think that
You would think,
queerness would be
you know,
separated.
in it, there were 100 so students in my drama department, and I was the only one who was out in the entire 4 years that I was in that school. And I remember that there used to be other people who I knew were queer who would come to me and we would talk, you know, and have that space. And it's like, we both know that we're going through the same thing,
Yeah.
but we're too afraid because of what's around us. And when I said survival before, it was really that means of survival. So I really went back in the closet at that time. I remember there was a student above me who was out, and they asked me once, "Oh, I thought you came out." And I was like, "No, no, no, I didn't," you know, because that fear was so strong.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until college where I felt, okay, no, I am in a safer space where I can express this, and I can express it to myself. I know that that's who I am, but then having an openness to be able to really explore who I was and having that safety and the validation in a way to do that. So I had that feeling, but I think for me, my journey in becoming an activist really started when I was in New York. I mean, and even before, to say my own journey of queerness has changed, of where I felt at a certain point, okay, bisexuality does not truly identify who I am. It doesn't truly identify who I'm attracted to, how I feel within myself. And so that word queer came in so strongly. And I remember, speaking of the anthology, and in my bio, I wrote queer person. And I sent it to my mom. And my mom was like, "Why are you using queer? That's a mean word, you know? Why don't you use this or this?" And I was like trying to explain to her mom, no, we've reclaimed it. And it really encompasses who I feel I am inside. But going back to activism, for me, I was working as a receptionist in a dental office and scrolling through the news one day, and I saw a news article about a 12-year-old boy in Illinois, someplace out west, who had committed suicide because he was bullied in school. And it was a very singular, very transformative moment for me where I said to myself, what the hell are you doing? What are you doing sitting at this desk, reading your book, just floating the days away? What are you doing? You know? And then when I moved to Malta, it just grew, this understanding of what I had been through, the sadness and the pain that I had been through as a young queer person. And then this story of this young boy, his name was Jamal Miles. I will always remember him and the path that he put me on. Just sitting and seeing that news article and saying, if this boy knew the family that was there for him all over the world, maybe he would still be here, you know? So for me, the underlying passion for my activism is to be that community for those who feel that there is nothing, that there is no one, that the isolation that I felt as a young person has stayed with me and will stay with me for the rest of my life, but that at the same time has driven me to be an activist, to be a safe space for a person, because I truly believe it just takes one kind voice at the right moment to make that difference. So for me, that's always stayed with me.
And thank you so much for sharing that. And the way that statistics are showing is that that's not necessarily, that those instances are not necessarily on the decline.
It's not enough.
And there's such a beautiful story of hope in linking that experience where you go, oh my God, that, first of all, that could have been me, but the space or the power or the strength that I might have gotten to experience at this moment as I'm sitting on this desk right now, that does not mean that this person is also experiencing that at this time.
And the privilege I have. Privilege I have to have made it out of that time, to have the strength that I have today. How can I not utilize it?
Yes.
How can I not utilize it? I wouldn't be able to sleep with myself, to be honest. Knowing that I have a voice, and maybe it's because, okay, I came from the States and all of this, and it's that protest, feel. But for me, it's become an interlocking part of my life, to commit to advocacy.
Jackie, so a moment, and thank you so much for sharing that, Kat, but a moment such as that, and if I had to tell my story, I think I'll find that moment as well. And I think so many people will experience moments of hope, moments of falling in love, moments of heartbreak. That queer story is launched with a certain power and a certain strength at that point. But I don't know if you had a similar moment such as that can sort of come to mind.
I think it's a series of moments, and certainly, in my life growing up, born 62, so being at school in the 70s, college in the 80s, very different time. I mean, like you, I was very conscious of my queerness, didn't have those terms for it from being probably about 4 years old, knew that there was not this boy-girl thing going on, and not identifying with the little pink dress girl stereotype. And just having this, from that age, preoccupation that there was something different about me in terms of what attracted me. It was like, stories of strong women, like my dreams were about, being carried off into the woods by a wicked witch, not because it's scary,
Give me the apple.
give me the apple, give me that gingerbread,
Give me the spinning wheel.
and so, you have no frame of reference at that age. You don't know where this stuff is coming from. Maybe I've been one of these people all my life, I don't know whether it's a blessing or a curse, with this inner dialogue stuff, and incredibly powerful dreams and things like that. But I think if you haven't got a way of articulating something, you haven't got the language, you haven't got the support, you haven't got the possibility, then so much of it is inside your own head. And that's, I think, as queer people, that's a lot of the issue a lot of the time. Because there is so much going on in there. Absolutely. And sometimes you're desperately trying to get away from it, and blocking out that internal voice or those voices and those shameful things that you pick up, and you grasp onto. It's incredible how an unkind word or a stereotype or something you've picked up on can stay with you for years. And the triggers and everything. I'm actually getting chills just thinking about that. And also how that can lead to a lot of self-destructive behavior as well, from a young age and throughout your life. If you don't find yourself and your way of being and find some acceptance and all that. So for me, it was a journey very much of always knowing, but then trying to find ways of expressing that, and even to talk about it, and then getting rejection, which has happened continually, or picking up on stuff, things that my mom said. She was not an easy person to live with, very messed up in terms of sex and sexuality. And I was actually, from a young age, a very highly sexualized person. So it was how that
Yeah.
developed, and you know, you and I have talked about this before, about, and then if things like trauma, abuse, you know, difficult experiences around sex happen to you, how that can also then
Compounds everything. All
absolutely
of those messages.
But especially if you know, you said about reaching out to people and getting knocked back, or even if they're accepting, but we can't talk about this, we can't be open about this. And especially with, you know, young women and girls exploring sexuality, you know, I mean, we talked about this on the ferry, didn't we? I was at a, you know, an all-girls school. Of course, there was experimentation and stuff going on. You know, of course, we were getting into each other's pants, but it was very secret, very behind closed doors. And I remember, you know, talking about moments, one instance where, you know, because obviously that was great from my point of view, and seemed like, oh, there's other people who are feeling. But what I didn't realize was for a lot of them, and there were, you know, I'm not talking about just one other person, I'm talking about, you know, group or intersecting groups. It was either they were just experimenting as a prelude to having heterosexual relationships, or they were so scared that it was like, this must not be talked about. So from around about age, I think, coming into secondary school, about 11, puberty, classic time, it was like, this shall not be done anymore, shall not be talked about anymore. You know, that door is closed. So yeah, lots of moments. Then, you know, going through that, for me, teenage years were very much about, well, pony girl stuff, but then a whole other life, which was about music, which was about going to see bands, was about lots of performance stuff around at that time. So punk poets, you know, hanging out with a wide group of people. And expressing myself in that way through dress, experimenting with what the boundaries were. And in that, especially with punk, there were no boundaries. And music really crossed lots of genres as well. So you could get away with a lot of behavior, a lot of style of dress, being who you were, experimenting with hairstyles, dyeing your hair, this, that, and the other, you know. Even if it was just using food dye we used to use. I remember going, I had dyed my hair like different colors and going, and then it rained. And I just had all these streaks of color.
And like there was still high fashion. Regardless. I met people who were like, I think I want to try that.
But yeah, these moments, and then college was I think the big step for me, when it was definitely I fell in love with somebody. I fell in love with another woman, right kind of at the end of 3 years at college. I was in college in the Midlands in England, and that was and it was hell.
Why was it hell, Jackie?
Because her flatmates, her two male flatmates, completely rejected her. You know, she was actually engaged to a guy at the time, and you know, her life was turned upside down, my life was turned upside down. And then there was that whole thing too of like, right, okay, we feel this way, but the restriction on you was still incredibly, you know. And, you know, we would do things like we'd go to Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp, we could be open there, you know. But then I realized, for me, it was like, okay, this isn't the one. So then there's that thing too, isn't there, of, you know, you've got so much of what you dreamed of, but it just wasn't kind of working. And also the rejection from people, and you then coming out, because you've now got a word. She's like, you know, and I thought I was a lesbian. I thought I must be a lesbian. Because I feel so strongly. So that's how I kind of came out first. And then working back from that and trying to get back to myself, you know, and the whole bisexuality thing. And the crucial moment with that, I think, was when a year later, after I'd graduated, I then moved to Edinburgh. And bisexuality was starting to be talked about then. And there was, I mean, this sounds crazy now with an online world, but there was a bisexuality newsletter, believe it or not, that was printed and sent to you in the mail.
A literal subscription.
Yes, yes. And people wrote stuff,
Wow.
and so that was like coming out of a group in London, coming out, once a month, once every 2 months, whatever. So that was like, okay, started exploring that. And the first bisexuality conference, which was held in Edinburgh, and had kind of come out of the reason it was held in Edinburgh, it kind of came out of a moment where talking about fluidity and how people's orientations change, or whatever. And it's down to who you fall in love with as well, a lot of the time.
Yeah.
The person who was in charge of the lesbian society and the person who was in charge of the gay society, because everything was segregated in those days. We were all in these boxes, and there the twain shall meet, which is why I love now we embrace queerness, LGBTI,
The
plus,
inclusivity of everything. Yeah.
and they got together. So this man and woman got together, and they're all shit broke. All hell broke loose. You can imagine, because that challenged so many, and they were both activists. They were both known, and they basically said, we're going to have the first bisexuality conference in Edinburgh.
awesome.
And that came out of a moment.
That's
So,
awesome.
that was a moment for me as well. Being around in a room at a conference with other
Yeah.
people talking about bisexuality.
How I feel.
And how, and it's
I
like
mean-
finding your tribe, isn't it? It's like,
Yeah.
you see yourself and you go, actually, okay. And it aligns so many different
a
feelings for me, that
validation.
moment.
Yeah, I think it's a validation of queerness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Listening to what you're saying, I really relate to a lot of it, because I went through a period where I thought, oh, I'm just experimenting, this is not really who I am, whatever. And then when I was first intimate with a woman, I was like, oh no, it's
Yeah.
that's it,
Yeah.
Going back to that moment of I found home at this point, like when you created that first
Yes,
artwork, in a
yes,
conference such as that.
yes.
I mean, we know that bisexual shame is still something that is
Huge.
so
It is huge.
That almost, I think, it has a certain weight about it, because it can come from inside
Yeah.
the community itself. So not necessarily
For sure.
being
Sure.
projected to us from people who have never had a queer experience, or just do not relate to the queer experience, or have no empathy, was more than anything, to the queer experience. But having it come from the inside is so tough. And it's so interesting mentioning the head of the lesbian group and the head of the gay group all coming. I do want to imagine that staff meeting.
I
don't want to
just
imagine
love
meeting.
that. I just love
But
it.
these, and it's really interesting how we didn't plan it, but we ended up sort of touching on these little moments. And one other aspect of these two amazing people that I have in front of me right now is one of my moments, and I write about it in a book that I have, one of the published scripts, of how watching gay movies was one of my safe spaces, one of my finding homes, and one of the sort of endless queer films that I wrote about it within also the HIV narrative, of how so much gay drama came out of that particular episode of our history, and it is an incredibly heavy, dramatic point of our lives, that point of our story, around the point of our history, but how I found so much solace in those beautiful stories. But that is a moment that I hold very dear, because it was a time when I would have never had the vocabulary to speak about how my own identity was, or you were both talking about experiences outside of Malta, and how that richness and that you would have brought it to here, and all of your work is informed so much by that. But I think me looking at it outwardly is that I did not have a gay group to go to. I didn't have a gay, and I mean, this is even at a time where drag shows and bars were happening, potentially not all out in the open, but some of them were. But my place in that moment of, oh, this really feels like home, did not feel like it. And my first time that I felt like home was when I was auditioning in the UK, and I was in the South Bank, and I saw two men dressed in suits holding each other's hands. And that's suddenly when I went, oh my God. And it's not what the derogatory narrative of it would have been. But to spin also that moment onto its head, because this is the opportunity of the unique conversation that we can have here. So many of, let's call them the blockbusters, now we can go from Brokeback Mountain all the way to all the bigger series, represent the gay male experience so strongly and beautifully and empathetically. And I think at that moment, that is what formulated so much of my awareness of this community. But it was much later in my formation that I actually got to think, maybe addressing the privilege that I had at that moment, to really address the queer woman perspective and the queer woman place in this space. So I would have loved to meet the head of that lesbian group that came into that conference. But in the absence of that, I've got two strong activists, female queer activists in front of me here. I would love to know your perspective on that, whether you agree with sort of me saying that I never got to celebrate it, or maybe because I found myself in those corners where you can tell, yeah, you were in those corners, but actually on the other side there was that going on, and it scares me the prospect of my formation and other people's formation might go in a particular way because of the male narrative and because of the importance that had, but taking away from the importance of also the female. And another conversation would be the non-binary narrative in there as well. But both of your moments of you being the only person out, for example, in your performative school, would you also, being a woman, would have played into that? Slash, where were the role models who were holding your hand and holding your space at that point?
You know, as you're speaking, I think some repressed memories are coming up as well, because I remember I used to go on Tumblr all the time, back when Tumblr was like that really gay space. And that was really, I think, where it all came from.
Like personal ads that you put in the newspaper at that time, you know?
No, this is some repression coming out right now, because I completely forgot about that. But I was always on Tumblr. There were all of these different blogs of lesbians, bisexual people that I would be like, oh, this is it. This is it, you know, because I don't think I really saw much outside in the world. And what I did see was extremely fetishized.
Yes.
You know, it was always, oh, the girl who's in a relationship with a guy wants to hook up, and it's because she wants to attract her partner, you know, and that kind of narrative. When I was a young queer person, that was definitely taking center stage, you know, of like, oh, I don't want to be involved in that fetishizing of it, you know, and what is really further repression of women.
And also, yes, that thing about, oh, therefore you must be into having three-way sex.
Right.
You know, that assumption
you must be a promiscuous sexual person. Not that anything is wrong with that.
No.
But the fact that it's assumed, and then you have that label on you that this is the kind of person you are. So I can treat you in a certain way because you are this person.
Yeah.
And then the fetishizing, you know, that we see in porn, that we see in films, you know,
Absolutely.
like what's that movie with Denise Richards? Wild Things.
Oh, yes. Yes,
you know,
yes,
it's that kind of that female relationships exist to please the male gaze.
Yeah.
You know, so there's so much of that wrapped up in it. And then on the other side, within the queer community, it's, oh, you're also attracted to men, so no, you know, so it's you get it from both sides. So finding that home, a lot of pressure, you know, so finding that home was really challenging for me. And I think because there was nothing to be found, I turned to this wealth that was Tumblr. Unfortunately, it's turned into something else now. But
there's also something beautiful about the access that there was. They weren't either Hollywood movies or the big publishers or the people on the primetime programs that anybody could write those experiences, and getting to find where those experiences are. We've had a whole thing on people here in this country, people who still valued their religious morals and religious traditions so strongly, but were also queer, and that space just did not exist. And we live in a world where the combination of those two does exist now. But I think there's a huge luck and wealth in Tumblr being a thing at that time, just like any social media would have been for
it's like this hidden plethora of queerness, but of female queerness as well, where I could see other women living their lives and living their lives successfully and happily with partners, with female partners, and having their life. And so much of my own narrative was, sex exists between a man and a woman, and you're going to get married to a man, and oh, who are you dating? Who's your boyfriend? And it was always this narrative, you know? So it was very much internally, and even still now, something that challenges me in my own way with my own internalized homophobia, that no, this narrative can exist.
Yeah.
This narrative does exist.
Yeah.
It's okay that this
Yeah.
narrative exists.
Exactly. I mean, I think too that thing about hiding and you know the shame thing, but hiding in a practical sense that you're protecting yourself in a way, or you might be protecting your lover.
Yes.
You know, I mean, hooking up in toilets and underground garages and parks is not exclusively a male thing. Believe me, you know, that really was the reality. You know, certainly for me, for many years, either because you literally did not have anywhere to go, or the person that you were with was hiding their true sexuality and orientation from family partners, you know. So
and the pressures that any person who would have chosen to cruise in a place like that to be we've got a whole podcast over talking about cruising as well.
But even with you know with your girlfriend, that would be where the kinds of spaces where you would you know toilets. So you know men I think gay men think that they have a monopoly on that whole thing, and it's not true.
But I also think what you're bringing up about you know, this element of shame and having to sort of hide the intimacy, I think a lot of people assume, oh, that was a thing of the past. But that is still very much present. I mean, I remember there was someone who I met in high school, and we were in Columbus Circle, and she kissed me. And I was so conscious of people around. I remember feeling like there was spotlight right here, and the degree of shame that I felt of being out in the open, you know, and it was always something that stayed with me.
Absolutely.
You know, that shame that I can do this in one space, but if I do this in an open space, I might be in danger. I might get hurt as well, you know, because that even that feeling of violence, unspoken violence around you.
And for women, there's a double element with that as well. Because the threat of sexual violence is there. I'm not saying that it isn't for men, but you know, I
think for women, and this is not to generalize at all, but I think we feel it more regularly, more consistently, more constantly.
We expect it.
And it's expected. Yes.
So we're always vigilant
at some point.
We're always vigilant. And particularly as queer women, that's just another thing that is going to do you know what I mean? Like, it's another sign on your head kind of thing.
Yes. That's not to say that other persons who don't identify as women don't experience this and don't sit with this and hold this. None in the slightest.
But certainly, I'm sure in your past, certainly in mine, there have been definite being spat on, being shouted at, you know,
being sexualized at 11 years old, you know.
Absolutely.
It's never ever to discredit anybody else's experience. But if we don't talk about this, we are never going to move forward, or even be aware that even due to you're my friends, and even having this opportunity to just get to hear these words and experiences, and just we're never going to grow as a community if we are not truly taking in our collective experience together, and how actually these are the spaces that we need. These are the conversations that we need to be having. There is that we can do many more podcasts. We're coming up to an hour very soon. But what I'd love to, because you mentioned this already, Kat, when you said liberation, I'm always trying to imagine the person who is listening to us, and who knows what experiences are going on out there, or when even this is being heard. It might be heard in a place where people can go nowhere close to the experiences that they might have been privileged / unfortunate enough to get to experience. There might be people who might think that this is something of the past. There might be people who might think that I would love to get to a place to be speaking with the strength that these two queer women are talking today. What does queer liberation mean to you? Of course, there are so many layers to it right now. But I love the importance of those questions that I'm asking this to two queer women, to who knows how many people will look up to what you are talking about today. And it can be small, it can be as big as you like, so feel no pressure to say the specific thing that should be said. But for you, what does queer liberation feel like as queer women today?
I think for me, I have kind of revisited this a lot since becoming an HIV activist. And I would say that it's become much more easy for me to talk about being a queer woman and to talk about that aspect of my life, even though I am very happily currently married to a man who I love and adore, who totally gets me, who gets that side of me as well. But it's through that HIV activism that I've met so many, found my tribe, met so many amazing people, found the space because of the intersections there, to revisit my queerness, to feel comfortable that I am my authentic self, I am me. It's not about who I'm married to or who I'm sleeping with or how I'm expressing myself, how I'm presenting myself. It's about me. And I think the current climate of acceptance, of visibility, certainly living in Malta and Gozo these days, is that it's easier in lots of ways because there are spaces. I mean, it's been I talk about going to visit the office in LGBTI Gozo. It's like, I always say to you, it's like, this is the happiest place I ever come into. Sometimes, I literally,
so happy when she says that.
I pop in just to have a
Fills
hug,
my heart.
because it's this welcoming space, especially for me in the last few years. And just to be able to talk and be myself, be accepted for myself with my HIV status, as an HIV activist, but also as a queer woman, as a person, as an artist, to just find that. And I think that's the difference for me in where we are now, 2025, certainly in the last 5 years or so, living here. There's tremendous opportunities for people. And the fact that, you mentioned about how you don't want somebody else to have to go, if you can help somebody else to not have to go through what you went through. And I definitely feel that, both as an older queer woman, as an elder, using those words, but we
talked about this on the boat, how I've become a queer elder,
veteran, whatever, survivor, who knows, just as a person, who's lived a longer time. Those experiences we can share with different generations are so important, the lessons we can learn, and it works both ways. But it's about spaces, it's about self spaces. I mean, for me, there was no end of clubs, pubs, social spaces where I could go in the past. But that actually wasn't what I was really looking for. I was looking more for a sense of community, somewhere where you can quietly talk, be accepted, get a hug, not say anything if you don't want to say anything. And that's the difference, I think. And but very much about that sharing, giving something back, offering a safe space for people, and validating our experiences by saying, I'm here, this is me now. All this time in the past, we had all these different things that, and that's important too, but accept me as I am here now. And that's what it's given me.
Absolutely, and it cannot exist in isolation. Look at how you're bringing in everybody in there, and that is truly what the movement is and what the community is. I don't know how you last words.
I do. I think about my queer journey and the spaces that I've traveled. Even within my own self, and there was some LGBT, podcast, another LGBT podcast.
There's another one. There's another one.
And this person was saying something like, as I got older, I became more gay and more powerful in my queerness, and that's something that has always stayed with me, because if I go back to that place when I was 15, I never imagined that I would have this point where I could speak so passionately, so strongly, so authentically about my experiences in my life. So for me, I always think about the younger folks. I always think about young LGBT people, that this point in time is just the beginning. You have so much longer to go.
Yes.
You have so much longer to go, and so many ups and downs, yes, but then you'll get to a point where it's like, I made it. I am through that. I am on the other side of this, And for me, that queer liberation is that journey, going on that journey, but also unlearning all of these different messages that still permeate. I mean, I'm 30 years old, and that stuff is still with me, and it's still there, and it's still an active effort to combat that internal voice, that this is not my voice. This is not how I really feel about myself. These are the messages that I've heard from other people, from people who do not matter in my life, And something else quick to mention, there's a beautiful interview between Anderson Cooper and Stephen Colbert, where he's talking about suffering. And he's saying that I'm grateful for my suffering because I'm grateful to be alive. And if I'm grateful to be alive, then I have to be grateful for this.
Yes.
And my suffering, the pain that I have gone through in different experiences, I can now be at this point where I say that this has made me who I am, and that's a good thing. I am happy with the person that I am. I am proud of the person that I am, and proud that I have reached this point because of my suffering, perhaps, that I can give this back to other people. Not suffering, of course, but community and acceptance and safety and empathy and love, and through that, healing those parts of myself that are still broken by the experiences that I've had. So for me, that queer liberation is allowing those young people to get to that point,
It's just so beautiful, and the hope within which you both talk is genuinely so inspiring. Who knows who'll be hearing our words, but in our conversation, we started from what you create, and then we went into moments. And now you finished in spaces. And when you think how that process, it's the process of any artist, but I think it's also a process of such a queer community that those moments trigger and start off so many things. And you both in your own work, but now even through your words, and I'm sure this is not the last we'll hear from you and your beautiful experiences, the spaces that you get to create for others. I have no doubt, I mean, I'm experiencing it from sitting here, but somebody hearing your words, queer women who are still on their ways, queer any gender and any experience, who literally listen to what you've been through, you've shared, and been kind enough to take ownership of and find strength in, it is genuinely so inspiring. So I cannot thank you enough for being with us on this podcast. That was Jackie and Kat with us here today. Thank you for joining us and hearing what we had to say. There are mines of wealth in there, and I hope that it provides hope and space for all of you. Take care of one another. Please love each other with urgency. And this was No Shame from MGRM. Thank you so much.